Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started so we can be thoughtful of time. Sounds like it was a nice and cold tour. Yeah. But so hopefully it's nice to sit. I was apologizing to the last group saying I have no pool noodles, I have no lasers, and people just had lunch and we're sitting outside, so I felt this is not going to be the most exciting. But you all just came from a freezer, so hopefully slightly better than that. My name is Christina Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Director of Volunteer Programs here at Second Harvest. I have been with the organization about 9 months, and my role is new, so that's probably why I haven't gotten to meet many of you and been out to as many mobiles, but I support the volunteer operations in the distribution center, so groups that come Monday through Saturday. We have about 50 volunteers a day. I also support our Vista AmeriCorps program and then volunteers in other parts of the building like our interns. I think it's also helpful to know that before working at Second Harvest, I was at an agency partner site of Second Harvest running their food pantry and their Gleaners program and their Kids Cafe meal site, and that's at the Lucier Community Education Center, if anyone's familiar with the west side of Madison. So some of the things that were being mentioned in the ordering video with Katie, I was like, ooh, I was that partner that was annoying, asking, why can't we do this? Or why did this come this way? So I have a passion for working with volunteers and also, food programs in particular. So hopefully some of the content we're going to be covering today, Laura, Megan, and I actually developed a lot of it because it was before Annie started here, but really tried to keep in mind that experience of supporting volunteers at pantries. For me, it was a brick and mortar, not a mobile pantry. So hopefully what we're sharing, there's going to be some new resources. They're more helpful rather than feeling like a burden and extra paperwork. So what we're going to be covering in this next 50 minutes is a little bit about Second Harvest rebrand and a connection to the mobiles and the volunteering department in general. So I think you got a little bit of that on the tour, right? Was Chris speaking to the language of the rebrand, and obviously with that diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, we are really trying to be intentional. We already felt like we were inclusive in wanting to do this work, but just being more explicit about being an inclusive organization that's centering community needs, that's looking at what we're doing around diversity. I'm going to try to connect that to some of the language you'll see in these resources. We are going to be rolling out a new volunteer application and community agreement, and there was a little bit of confusion in the last group on who is this for. So I'll just say it now and then I'll try to say it again. We are going to have a new volunteer application that we're asking all mobile coordinators and regular volunteers of your sites to complete. We'll go into the benefits of that, but I think there was a little bit of concern for groups of 50 that come one time or business that signs up to help. They don't need to complete some of this paperwork. It's really about our regular folks that are a part of our Second Harvest community on a consistent basis. And then, has anybody ever had any interaction with the TFAP program, the Emergency Food Assistance Program? Okay, so
years ago,
oops, okay, yeah, so that's the federal subsidies that Community Action Coalition is one organization that distributes those items. They, because they're a federal program, they have guidelines around keeping people's information confidential when they come to pantries, and then also not discriminating. While we are not mandated by the federal government to use those resources, we have adopted the language and modified it just a little bit because they are best practices. So we're going to go over that as a little bit of a refresher and hopefully as language that you can use with supporting volunteers that come to your mobiles. Okay. All right, so as Chris mentioned, we have a new equity, diversity, and inclusion statement, a new website. I think it's all, I don't know, I like the branding, it's pretty. And we also have this internal philosophy of community engagement. And I want to share this because this is how the organization and those of us that engage with community being our partnerships, our programs, you all, volunteers, our donors, how we want to be building relationships and we're sharing this both as a, hey, this is who we are now, but also we expect to be held accountable to this, that we see you all as partners in the work. So our statement is, Second Harvest works to fulfill our mission in southwestern Wisconsin through partnerships and collaboration. I think this is a perfect example of that. We can't do it all on our own, and we shouldn't be, so we do it as partners with others. We seek to do this work through meaningful relationships that advance community-identified priorities. Hopefully with community-identified priorities, that's also around being flexible in the setups for mobiles that work best for you all and the communities that you know. It's about being responsive and understanding when there's requests for certain food items. Can we try to get that for folks? So that's our commitment to say, yeah, well, it might be easier to make things uniform for everyone. Ultimately, community knows community best. These relationships center the voices of groups that are marginalized and value community wisdom and assets. We believe in community engagement that is respectful, culturally responsive, and encourages a sense of civic identity for all. So centering community wisdom and assets is also hopefully reflected in the idea that they're moving away from everybody having the same shirts and sort of perpetuating that visual of some people have a lot more and some people have a lot less. You know, and the name tags are helpful because that's from a customer service perspective. I know who to talk to if I have questions. But really trying to acknowledge that at any given point on any given day, we all have things to offer, every single one of us, and we all have needs to be met. I always think of, you know, somebody might show up to a mobile pantry and on that particular day, they need food that's a need that they have to be met. But also volunteers show up with a need to be met. Sense of community, connection to others, purpose. So I just think that's a good reminder that just because somebody shows up needing food doesn't mean that they don't have strengths and assets. And, you know, I'm sure all of you believe that, but I like that it's intentionally stated here. And then one thing that I think is cool and exciting is this encouraging a sense of civic identity for all. So with the volunteers that you work with, how great is it when the volunteers leave and say, I had such an awesome time supporting this pantry today. That's great. We want that. How much more awesome is it when they leave saying, I had such a great time supporting this pantry today, and I want to get more involved in ending hunger. So that's always my hope, is that people will leave not only feeling like they found a sense of community and purpose, but also that they'll be motivated to do more, to look at policy, to look at how they donate money, to come back and volunteer more time. That helps develop that civic identity. So I know in the future we're going to be sending this out to the folks that know us and collaborate with us to say, does this seem reflected in what we're doing? And do you think we could do this better? So I think it's a nice framing for how we're making shifts in certain aspects of the programming and the language that we're using. Just a good framing statement. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to go over the two pieces of, well, I guess three pieces of paper that are not in your packet, the packet that you don't have, because I forgot to hand it to you. No, that's a different one, so okay, thank you. Sorry. I was chatting about freezer and totally forgot. But we're going to be talking about a volunteer application. Here, I give you the background. Or did they already have it? Thank you. Okay, so while that's being handed out, you might be thinking, wow, another piece of paperwork. That does not sound fun. Well, we are hoping you will also see the benefits in this new volunteer application. And that is that we will be able to have your emergency contact information if something happens at one of the sites and we need to get in touch with someone. Again, this document is for mobile coordinators and your regular volunteers. So don't panic if you think, I have a group that comes, once a year. Do I have to have them fill this out? No. Volunteer liability. So something that will be included in the manual that Laura is working on is more communication around the benefits of being a volunteer at Second Harvest. And if something did happen and you were injured, we do offer secondary liability insurance. So, you used your primary insurance and there was still some outstanding costs. We do have a version of liability insurance. And so being able to say like, yes, this is a volunteer of Second Harvest will help ensure that we can tap into those resources. Volunteer recruitment. So we sometimes get people contacting Second Harvest saying, I'm interested in this mobile pantry. How do I volunteer with them? And because many of the mobiles have their own coordinators and their own setup, we want a way to get somebody connected with you all, but to be able to say, yeah, we talked to this person and they have some awareness of what we're about and what we're doing. So you don't get somebody that's totally confused about what they're signing up for. So this will allow us to help manage those requests, or if there's a time where you feel like we need some help recruiting volunteers, this will be a tool for that as well. Tracking hours, I know that that's a system that has evolved over time. This is really helpful for young people that need to log hours for school or court-ordered hours for us to have some name record to be able to verify, yes, you volunteered with this particular mobile. And then recognition and communication. So if you look at the application, hopefully the front is pretty straightforward. We have made the demographics information optional. I will do a plug that it does help us with some of our grant writing and reporting to United Way and other places, but if you're somebody that prefers not to complete that, we respect that. Also, as we are committed to continuing to become more inclusive and diverse, this also helps us understand who our current demographic of volunteers are. So front side, hopefully contact information, demographics, and emergency info. I think those are pretty standard. If you flip to the back, a couple pieces that Laura was really excited about are the newsletter. Do you want to opt into the newsletter? But more so, would you like to receive text messages around important mobile updates and closures? If you are unsure of whether you want to opt in, you don't have to opt in now. You can opt in at any time. But it's my understanding that that's really helpful if there's a closure, if something has been canceled, if there's inclement weather. So you can opt in now, or if you change your mind later once you're realizing, oh, I wish I had known this thing that probably went out in a text message, feel free to request that at a different time. And, you know, Laura has said we're not going to be team texting you, all the time, that it'll be kind of sporadic and as necessary. The piece that I really want to point is, how many of you have youth volunteers that come to your site on a consistent basis? Okay, so this is going to be helpful if you have a volunteer show up that has not brought a parent with them, or a parent or guardian, and we want to make sure that somebody knows where they are and that they're safe. So there is now a parent guardian line and a signature section. These will also be available on our website as an electronic, a web-based platform, so somebody can enter directly, goes right into our system, or an attachment that they can directly write into and then send back, so that if somebody did show up and you think, I really feel like an adult should know that you're here because what if you got injured? You could potentially get on the phone with that parent or guardian, or have a young person do it and have them fill out that application by going to our website. So that will get emailed out in the follow-up that Laura and Andy will be sending, the link to different versions to try to make it as easy as possible.
You said that if they were not regulars, so I have 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders from OLA coming each once a year.
Yeah, and I'm guessing they're coming with an adult, right?
And they also do a form
yes.
at their school.
Perfect. They're covered then. That's great.
Okay.
Any group that's coming as part of a group, they should be covered while they're on, it is our responsibility to follow the manual that Andy and Laura are providing around safety protocol and best practices, but they should be covered paper-wise through the organization. This is more like somebody signs up or contacts you last minute and says, I need required school hours, and shows up, and, somebody has to be responsible for that young person when there's no adult there. Okay, so that's that piece of paperwork. The next one is a criminal background check, and this is new. This is for just the coordinators. And that, yes, just the,
I was gonna say,
Take 'em.
I will tell you right now, our volunteers, they give me their email address with me swearing on 6 Bibles that I will not release it to anyone else. So when I saw this, I thought, oh God, we're gonna have a real problem.
yeah. Just the coordinators, because there may be times if a young person did, if a youth group showed up early and you happen to be the only person there, just from a liability perspective, the coordinators were asking for the background check. I tell this to everybody. This is part of my spiel from having done volunteer engagement for 17 years, that if something shows up on your background check, it doesn't necessarily disqualify you from volunteering. There are very few offenses that we cannot place for, and the only people that are going to see this form are HR person. I will not be contacted. If something comes up, basically, Laura would be in touch about, any restrictions, but yes.
Did we fill these out for our sponsor already? Do you want us to fill them out again?
If you filled them out sorry?
Our community sponsor?
That's a great question. I think yes, I'll double check with Laura, but this is we don't have those forms from the community sponsor, and this is ours. So, and Megan gives a thumbs up. Yes. So
Okay.
thank you. Any questions about that form? Yes.
I also co-coordinate a school pantry employee,
Okay.
and they do a background check, so I would still have to do it with you.
Yeah, unless we could also get a copy of your background check, but sometimes that's more of a pain to try to obtain that. Typically, that's beneficial to nonprofits in that it saves us some money, right, to get a copy, but it can also be a hassle.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay, so we're good on that form? Great. Okay. Can you do the next slide just to make sure I'm on the right place? Okay, great. So now we're going to go over the volunteer community agreement. And we're actually going to go through each line to make sure that the information makes sense and there's no questions, because I think most of you are the point people for your mobiles, right? No, or you're going to take the information back to some people. That, again, because these forms are for regular volunteers, if somebody says, what does that mean? Maybe you'll have some awareness of, oh yeah, I remember they said that's what this is for. I think it's pretty straightforward, but another thing is, this is a community agreement. This is not we are expecting you to do this. We want this to feel like something we all agree to, because we all care about being welcoming, inclusive, safe, and want to make sure that people get access to food. So we'll breeze through them, but stop me if you have questions at any time. So the first one is, be respectful, kind, and courteous to everyone. This includes not using judgmental language amongst volunteers and mobile guests. Greet people upon arrival. If the pantry is busy, indicate how long their wait may be. Once we get into the section on non-discrimination, I feel like this is really helpful, some of these customer service aspects, to talk with your volunteers about, because they can make a huge difference in somebody feeling like they had a dignified experience versus showing up and feeling like they got food, but it didn't feel good. So just like if you went to a doctor's office or anywhere, it's really helpful if somebody says, you know what, we're running behind, we're going to get to you as fast as we can, but it might be this long for these reasons. There was a time when I was running the Lucier Pantry and a volunteer group didn't show up, and I had 40 or 45 people lined up, and so I was doing it all by myself, and it made such a difference just to say, I'm so sorry, it's going to be a long wait, a really long wait, but I'm going to do my best to get through everybody. I'm the only person volunteering today. And it was a really long wait, but that was still better than having people not know what's going on and feeling like they're being forgotten about. Create a welcoming and inclusive environment for all volunteers, partners, and families. Wear your Second Harvest name tag when volunteering. So again, we've talked about that from a customer service perspective, especially because we're getting rid of everyone wearing the same t-shirt. That helps people know who they can go to ask questions or bring concerns. Follow all COVID guidelines as required by Second Harvest Food Bank. And then current protocols are available on the to volunteer coordinators by visiting the volunteer resources section on our website. So first, I want to thank you all for navigating these COVID policies with us. We're still in COVID. Does everybody know what the current policy is right now? Should I go over like just a refresher?
I think it's do whatever you want from what I see.
Okay, that's more or less it, but there's a little caveat to it. So
If
it's
you're face to face, close, you need to wear a mask, if they're wearing a mask.
correct, yes.
If they're wearing a mask.
And I say that because in the last session, people said, yeah, it got emailed to me, but like so much information gets emailed to me, and all the places that we see COVID guidelines are very overwhelming. So it is masks are optional currently, but from a customer service perspective and wanting everyone to feel welcome and included and not feel like there's a barrier to receiving food, if you go up to somebody and they have a mask on, we would ask that you please wear a mask, just being respectful. And that's because we would never want somebody to feel like they couldn't access food for safety reasons. If they were immunocompromised, if they had a family member that couldn't be vaccinated, or they themselves were not vaccinated, or for whatever reason, that's just kind of a customer service, being kind thing. But yes, other than that, optional. And I say, hey, here's where this resource section is. So if anybody said, well, that's your policy, you can't tell me to put a mask on to go up to somebody. It's hopefully we're explaining that the reason we're doing this is because we want everyone to feel safe and welcome. But you can put it on Second Harvest. Go to their website. It's right there. So we'll also update that if anything changes. I would like to say we're going in the direction of not masks, but who knows. Okay, also in alignment with COVID, but just in general, do not volunteer if you are experiencing any of the following symptoms: a temperature of 100.4 degrees or higher, chills, a cough, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing, fatigue, new loss of taste, smell, or any other symptoms of a common cold. This is also helpful because I don't know if any of you remember pre-COVID when you probably went a lot of places with a lot of colds and we thought nothing of it. Like I went so many places sick when I realized now, oh gosh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Especially when you care and are committed and dedicated, it can feel like you're letting people down if you don't show up and you have a cold. But you know what? We don't want you to come if you have a temperature, because one, you might have COVID, or you might have the flu, you might have something else. So this also helps people be okay taking care of themselves, right? It's okay. We'd rather have you be home and take care of yourself. Be on time and responsible for completing your volunteer duties as agreed upon. Report your volunteer hours after each shift. Thank you for reporting your hours. I will say, in addition to having our reporting for grants and United Way and some other things like that, we are also going to be audited as an organization on our hours next year. So we're just really trying to tighten up our data collection so that in July, we aren't scrambling to say, how are we collecting hours, or we're missing information. So thank you for doing those after reports.
When you first did hours, I sat and went, oh, I have 7 that were here 3 hours, and I had 3 that were here 3.5 hours, and now I just take the total number of volunteers and multiply it by 3.
Okay.
I mean, to me, that's close enough.
Yep.
I'm a volunteer, I'm not getting paid, so
Yep.
I'm not gonna spend 2 hours figuring
Yeah.
out.
And we're not trying to make it hard for people to want to be in roles like that, And in general, I know with volunteer reporting, we are always underreporting. So, but thank you for doing that. Let's see. Stay in contact with any questions or concerns. The next two are just in alignment with what you'll see in the manual. So follow all safety protocols. This includes, but not limited to, wearing safety vests, proper lifting techniques, and appropriate use of pallets. We put this in here because while we offer liability support to volunteers and we take responsibility as an organization for people being safe through our policies and procedures, individuals also have a responsibility by not, moving pallets and flip-flops and just generally being aware of their surroundings. And then food safety protocols also are going to be outlined in the manual, and then I know there's additional trainings that happen throughout the year, but one of those points are that we cannot distribute food that is not Second Harvest, so only distribute Second Harvest food. Report any accident or injury to the on-site coordinator or mobile rep as soon as possible. So I stress this with the last group because there are sometimes times where somebody says, oh, I'm fine, you see that they were clearly injured, but they walk away saying, I'm fine, and then you find out that they actually went to the emergency room at a different time. That's really important for us to document Second Harvest for our insurance purposes, and also we want to make sure that person is okay. So I believe that they are getting incident report forms sent out They're in the supply kit. So just, please make sure people are completing those. And then the next one, while it might seem obvious, from experience working at several pantries, it's not obvious. So we just put it in there to be explicit. Do not request or accept compensation of any type in exchange for food from any shopper. So I think most people know that, but when I've thought that in the past, it hasn't been obvious. Yes.
One thing that I will say though is the clients were somewhat confused because in our community, as I was telling Annie, we had Ruby Pantry and the people had to pay $20 a box. So we had people that were coming up and saying, where do I pay the $20?
Oh, okay.
So, and we had to say, there's no fee here. And they're like, really? And so there was some confusion on the client's part.
Yeah. And I don't know, that's not a situation that I was referring to, but in general, like, we don't want anyone to ever think there has to be an exchange of anything for receiving food. And especially as you're onboarding new volunteers, this just helps make sure, like, hey, we're all in agreement with something that we might think is obvious because we've been doing this forever, but now it's just stated right there for everyone to see. Okay.
Can I ask one question? And
Yeah.
I don't know if this falls under the compensation, but many of our volunteers are in the realm of probably being clients,
Okay.
but they have volunteered. So I know some of the philosophy has been they should not give food till the end, but the problem is if they wait till the end, they may not have food.
Right.
So you can tell me if and Annie has said so far, okay, is what we do is when we get to probably 3/4 of the way through what we know is the number of clients we're going to be getting, we have people substitute for the volunteers that have already expressed an interest in getting food, and we say, all right, so-and-so, I'll cover for you, go get your food, put it in your car or take it to your apartment, and then come back and resume your volunteering. Is that?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a gray area, and I've had several conversations with Laura about this because in other locations, if it's people get served in the order that they arrive, correct? A typical practice is that a volunteer doesn't receive food during the middle of a shift on the day that they're volunteering. In that particular time, they would go at the end, but that they would be they could show up and receive food and get in line, get first in line as long as they're not showing up as a volunteer that day, because it could look like favoritism. It's a gray area. There isn't, that's what a lot of pantries do is encourage people to.
But if you only have one day.
Right.
Day
And so
month.
that's the little bit gray part about mobiles and how they're different than the brick and mortar, right? Like every week somebody volunteers, same location. So I think if that's a system that's working for now, I think that's one of those things where we'll continue to have conversations and there isn't a perfect answer. So it's how can we be intentional and clear as to why we're using that method, because there isn't a perfect method and it just evolves and we have.
And sometimes what we've done is even just filled the grocery cart and left it to the end for those people.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But it's the same principle.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's only like maybe 2 or 3. So it isn't like we're doing dozens of people.
Yes. And there are still some pantries that do not allow or encourage folks that are accessing food resources to volunteer. And that practice is completely contradictory to what our rebrand is saying, what our philosophy of community engagement. So I love that somebody feels welcome enough to both volunteer and receive food. That's amazing. So
I think one of the issues to it was food safety from years ago. Was if a volunteer gets food in the middle of the pantry and there's meat involved.
Sure.
It's the middle of the summer and they're going to go put it in their car and it's going to sit there. There was a safety issue.
Yeah.
And I would say to the point that you brought up, Bill, just making sure that if a volunteer is kind of leaving their volunteering role to then receive food and go back, that there's just a clear distinction of that change, because in years past we have had actually volunteers visibly cherry picking, oh, that looks really good.
Yeah.
And so we just want to be clear to the perception of everyone else watching or waiting in line that they don't think it's just volunteer thinking that looks good, but they're taking that step, to become a recipient and then just going back.
Thank you. Okay, so the next section, if you flip to the back, is confidentiality of information. So this is where those federal guidelines, that language sort of picks up. Confidentiality of personal information is crucial. Volunteers have an ethical responsibility to protect personally identifiable information, including but not limited to name, address, phone number, date of birth, etc. One way that we can keep people's information confidential, especially in a program where people are not actually required to fill out forms, we're not collecting some of this data, right, that other places do, is avoiding using names if we know somebody. So, if I was, I don't know, yelling to Bill, hey, Bill, good to see you. And Bill's like, I came to the pantry today and I don't want people to know that I'm here, or I'm with my kids and I actually showed up in a different capacity. That has created a dynamic that somebody might not have wanted. So if I'm having an individual conversation, you could exchange names, right, because it's a private conversation, but it's just being really cautious of not yelling people's name across a parking lot, because on any given day, somebody might not want people to know that they're at a mobile. Also, if you recognize people in community, not then sharing that information with others or having conversation amongst volunteers of, can you believe so-and-so is here? And I believe that this isn't the group of people that would do that, but it's a good reminder for folks that are showing up to volunteer that when we onboard them, we can be saying, hey, this is something we want to agree to. Because I will say, when I was at the Lucia Pantry after 7 years, I knew so many people. I actually had to untrain myself to not yell people's name because that felt unnatural to me because I had a relationship with them. So it is a helpful reminder because it can feel very intuitive and natural to actually say like, hi, Angel, versus it feels cold to just, hey. Okay, so we're gonna transition into the non-discrimination section. We get the next one. But I do want to frame that by mentioning unconscious bias. So unconscious bias is social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and these biases stem from one's tendency to organize social worlds by categorizing. So unconscious bias are these unintended people preferences that we have developed through socialization, through our lived experiences, and through how media portrays certain groups of people. Everybody has bias. Every single person has bias. And the reason I think it's helpful to name is because when we go into the non-discriminatory section, if we're not aware that we have bias, that's when it can actually inform our behaviors and become problematic. And so, I've seen this show up in somebody makes a judgment about somebody coming to pantry because they drive a particular vehicle. And we don't know anything about that person, right? We don't know anything about their circumstances. But I will say that's one place where the media has painted what the face of hunger looks like. And